pretty much a national voice right now for law enforcement, being the, forgive me, the president of the Chief of Major Cities.
Major Cities Chiefs Association.
Okay. We've already heard Mayor Turner talk about some of this panel he'd like to get organized, and he's looking at September. I'm sure you've had discussions with the mayor already. Can you talk about some reforms you think that you've already talked, that you have specifically identified that you'd like to maybe change with HPD without having to worry yet about some national guidelines?
Yeah, I think that one of the things I'm really grateful for the mayor's executive order, where a lot of some critics don't want to give him any credit, but that's their prerogative, is that when we look closely at the executive order, and we were discussing, we've always trained. We don't train in the carotid control hold here. We don't train in manipulation of the neck for a control hold, but we've never actually specifically put it in policy. So his executive order mandating not using to not allow the use of carotid control, which we never trained at, actually codified our existing practice, which is huge. The other thing that he did in terms of the other things, the warning before you
crowd control.
The carotid control hold. That's the problem with this mask, right?
Yes, I understand.
And English is my second language. Want me to start again?
No. I understand what you're saying.
Carotid. This is the carotid artery.
Okay.
I was trained in it in 1986, how to apply pressure from behind, and you do this, and you basically close off, if done properly, the blood flow to the brain, and people pass out. As a matter of fact, part of the training in the California Highway Patrol was we had to do it to each other. But unfortunately, in dynamic situations, too often, the officers weren't doing them right, and you ended up actually accidentally choking people to death. And so I think that's huge to actually not just have that, but also the fact that he's codified when feasible warnings before you deploy deadly force. And the last thing is everything that's an executive.
Break that down real quick. What's a feasible warning? Give me an example.
Well, I mean, if you draw a gun, if you go for a gun,
Okay.
you're not going to get a warning. The officer does not have time because
Right.
action beats reaction. But if someone's with a knife and they're standing, 30, 40 feet away, and you come to your firearm, you say, "Sir, drop the knife, sir. Stay where you are. Do not come forward. I don't want to have to shoot you." That's the kind of training he wants, and which.
Well, let me ask you. Some people like me hearing that would think that should already been standard. What was standard before that?
Well, it is.
Fair warning.
We do that, but
Okay.
the thing is, there's a difference between doing it because that's the way you're trained, and actually doing it because that's the way that policy requires you to do it. So it's actually, again, the executive order, and some of the changes are actually putting the policy what we're doing, and actually, the more that you put things in the policy and officers see it in writing, the more it's going to be embedded into their DNA, into their brain, and into the way that they conduct business. So it's not just about the way you train, but it's also about the requirements, the written requirements, and it's a redundancy of instilling these concepts and these principles into our officers' minds.
Okay. Any other types of reforms you're looking at right now? Or?
Yeah, we actually looked at, I've been here for 3.5 years, and if you go, I would recommend that the people of Houston to go to our YouTube, to go to YouTube and look for Chief Art Acevedo and the command staff addressing the very first day of cadet training at the academy. I have been telling my people that I'm going to hold them accountable for time, making sure that they slow down just a bit, assess, use time. It's on your side, all right? Time is normally on your side, so utilize it. Distance. Create distance. Keep your distance. If you see a guy with a knife, don't come up with your gun out and approach the guy. Stay back. Tamir Rice, I talk about that first year academy training. A young man, I believe he was about 12 years of age in Cleveland, Ohio. He was playing with a very realistic-looking pellet gun or BB gun at a park. The officers go to a man with a gun call. They drive right up and get out and they shoot him. You don't drive right up to a man with a gun call. You keep your distance, assess, take your time. So it's time, distance, numbers, call for sufficient units. One of the things that we're actually going to codify is when we have someone that's armed and in psychological distress, we're going to require a minimum of 2 officers, a supervisor, and a CERT team, which is our partners that we have a model for the rest of the country where you have a healthcare professional riding with one of our mental health officers. If available, they'll be required to respond. So we're taking a lot of our practices and we're actually codifying the policy. So we make sure that two things happen. One, what we ask them to do is actually done. And two, when they should have done it, could have done it, and didn't do it, we hold them accountable to the actual policy. So it's time, distance, numbers, cover, and concealment. We instill it in our officers, and from day one, the sanctity of life, the importance of everybody going home. And so I would encourage the community to take a look at what we say. We film them every time that we do them, and they're right there on YouTube.
Talking about holding officers accountable, is there any looking at reforming any way that officers are disciplined, either level of discipline or level of transparency?
Yeah.
Is there any reform in there?
Yeah, I think, look, well, one of the things that we're looking at the national level and here locally, and at the state level, I've already started to talk to John Whitmire and others, is a couple of things. Like here in Houston, long before we got here, a previous mayor's office negotiated that before we actually if you're my subject officer and you're the subject of investigation, Ashton actually, the Black Lives Matter individual, Ashton Woods, actually in his op-ed piece he printed, the notion that you have to give the officer everybody else's statement, basically give them all the evidence, and then and only then you can interview them. That's problematic, and that's something that we hope through the legislature under state law is going to change, or through the negotiation process here locally. But here's the challenge. We know that what happened in Minneapolis impacted Houston. It impacted the entire nation. We have got to have best practices, and we have to push those best practices beyond Houston PD to all 18,000 police departments, because what happens elsewhere impacts our standing here. That's something else we want to look at. The other thing we want to look at from a national standpoint, in many states, if you're an officer and you commit an act of misconduct today, the toll in terms of when you have to take corrective action, right, discipline somebody, starts from the day of the incident. That's what happens here in Texas. What we'd like to see nationwide is, like in some jurisdictions, it's not from the date of the incident, like 6 months from the date of the incident you have to take to initiate discipline, administer discipline. It's 6 months from the day of discovery of the misconduct, right? So we've got a lot of video here in Houston, and let's say that somebody's arrested or something happens and something egregious happened, but we don't learn about it for 6 months and 1 day. We can't do anything other than up to 15-day under contract suspension. But the problem with that is, what if it's something that was egregious and the officer really should be fired? So that's another area we need to look at. So we're hopeful that this is a watershed moment. I've been a cop for 34 years.
Have to, as like you were talking about, negotiate locally here with the police union as well, because a lot of this disciplinary action is negotiated in the contract on
Yes.
what level you're allowed to discipline an officer, to what degree.
Yes, and you know what's interesting, even with the current contract the way it is and this current state law, I've been here for 3.5 years, we've probably had 160 officers that are no longer here. I don't have the exact number on top of my head, but that's 160 officers that either were fired, retired, or resigned as a result of internal investigations that we've launched. We've had 3 officers that we have, through our investigations, have charged with crimes after shooting people. We've had an officer charged with murder out of the Harding Street. That was our investigation that led to those charges. We've had another officer that tased somebody, and we determined it wasn't objectively reasonable. That's another officer who was charged. So we are holding people accountable, but the problem is that, the challenge is that we want to actually be able to do even better, and that's what we're working on.
When do you make the call? Because a lot of officers are allowed to retire before they get fired.
Yeah.
And so
Well,
why is
they're not-
that decision often made?
They're not allowed to retire. I have no authority to tell somebody. There's nothing in state law. There's nothing in a contract. That's a benefit that if they've vested. Like this week, we had a sergeant that made a very egregious social media post. I believe he did it on last Thursday. We discovered it on Friday. When it was brought to our attention, we immediately, within the hour of discovering, he was relieved of duty. And on Saturday, he was given his 48-hour notice for a disciplinary hearing with me, which you're in the room where we have those hearings. I sit here. The subject officer sits right by me. And it was scheduled for 11 a.m. And at about 9-something, he submitted a retirement. There's nothing that you can do to stop that. The other piece is really important. Even if I were to fire someone, even if they were fired, be real clear, it's really important. That has nothing to do with retirement. That is a contract
I don't
between.
think the public's so much worried about, is he going to face, some sort of financial discipline?
Yeah.
Or action, but I think it's just the optics for the public.
Yeah, but again, it's like, there's no rule, there's no authority for the police department to take away somebody's retirement. Zero, none.
Yeah, I think people understand that. Again, I think it's just the optics that
Yeah,
this person was fired
but-
instead of they're retired.
Yeah, but how do you stop somebody from retirement? I have to give them a 48. Do you understand that under state law, under 47.3 of the government code here, you have to give a police officer a 48-hour notice before you interview them or before you bring them in for the disciplinary review hearing.
Okay.
If an officer is facing termination or demotion, they have to see the police chief. I have to give them a hearing under state law.
Okay.
Now, doesn't mean they have to accept that hearing. So if I put you on 48-hour notice and you come in on hour 46 and retire, the public needs to explain to me what's my authority to say, no, you're not retired. You walked in, you issue your retirement paperwork, and you leave. It's irrevocable. So it's important for the community, see, because people that want to destroy trust, they'll act and they'll make the community believe that somehow the police chief can stop that, and we have no authority to do so.
All right.